Surprise job gains, unemployment, it's not rising for once. What does it say about the economy? Some big debates unfolding on pipelines and a budget due as early as November 4th. To help break it all down, I'm joined by Sean Speer, my co-founder and editor at large. Hey, Sean.
Hey, Rudyard. Great to connect as always.
Well, let's jump into these job numbers. A nice kind of respite from some very gloomy news in August where we saw, significant job losses, especially in manufacturing. Unemployment now steady. It's still high at 7.1%, but we even saw an uptick of a couple jobs in the manufacturing sector. It all points to, maybe a slightly rosier picture for the Canadian economy despite UF tariffs, despite all the uncertainty. Do you think just we're all getting normalized? This is all becoming a little bit more comfortable as the months go on and the sky doesn't fall?
Yeah, I think the government will feel good about today's labor force survey results for the month of September. As you say, overall terms, they far exceed expectations. But I think there has to be only two cheers here, not three cheers, for a few different reasons. First of all, the overall trend line is still not good, Rudyard. We've added very few net jobs so far in 2025. I think if you look at it from that longer term perspective, the performance is pretty underwhelming. And then as I was reading them this morning, Rudyard, I had in my mind the really terrific question we got this week from someone at our Toronto pub night about different perspectives on the state of the economy based on the generational divide. That older Canadians are generally feeling better about the economy than younger ones, and that's certainly reflected in today's job numbers. The unemployment rate for younger workers, Rudyard, is now something like 14 or 15%, the highest it's been in well over a decade. So in that sense, you really do get the sense that the state of the economy really is in the eye of the beholder. And if you're a younger Canadian, there's a lot of reasons not to feel great about it.
Yeah, economists have started to talk, especially in the United States, about I'll make a hand gesture here for our YouTube viewers, a kind of, how do I do this? A K economy. Let's get the shape right. I don't know. The way to look at it is like one part of the K is going up and the other part of the K is going down. And what's happening is that older age groups seem to be benefiting in this economy. Older age groups often own assets. They own houses. They own stocks. We've seen a continued, record appreciation on a lot of different asset categories, maybe less real estate right now in Canada, but certainly equities at all-time highs, whereas younger age groups, and this is the issue that I don't think we spend quite enough time talking about. I mean, they don't even get the opportunity to accumulate assets, right? Because they're faced with, unemployment rates for 15 to 24-year-olds, as you said, at 14.7%, the highest in over 15 years. And, when they are lucky enough to be in a job, what are they facing? They still face pretty significant rents. They, are experiencing food costs that are 20% or more greater than what they were 3 years ago. So I would be curious to see, we always talk about, intergenerational fairness, the extent to which, younger people have increasingly gotten the worst part of the bargain in terms of the post-COVID economy. Does the budget focus on any of this? We talk about it, but what do we actually see in terms of policy, Sean? We see more supports going to seniors. We see the expansion of old age benefits of various types over the last, decade or more by all political parties. And more, recently we see increasingly like kind of targeted payouts that are just directed towards seniors, like a special, remember that special bailout or bail-in in COVID where we sent checks to seniors who were on fixed incomes, who didn't have any cuts to their CPP or OAS. We were still sending them checks. So I don't know, Sean, do you have any hope that in the face of these just grim employment numbers and all kinds of anecdotal evidence, I hear stories from friends and family about younger people really struggling to get into this job market these days, that we go beyond just words to some kind of action.
Yeah, I don't know. It's as a policymaker, trying to account for these different outcomes is not easy. Policy tends to be a pretty blunt force instrument. But the first order of business, I think, is understanding the nature of the problem. It's not just reflected in these latest job numbers where we see the labor attachment of young people weakening, unemployment high. And then, as you mentioned, when it comes to other basic costs like housing and food and so on. Earlier this week, Statistics Canada released the latest data on inequality in Canada, which is also rising to historic highs. And I think that overlaid with the generational dynamic, I think really does speak to the kind of urgency in a way, Rudyard, of addressing these issues around young people. I'll turn it back to you in a minute, but what really worries me, Rudyard, is that it comes to produce a sense of agitation or a sense of attenuation that extends beyond economics, if I can
Yes.
put it that way.
Into politics.
You'll recall we were in Ottawa. We were in Ottawa this week for a pub night, and we got a really good question about young people increasingly on both sides of the political divide, fighting over issues around culture and identity and so on. And those issues are real, and they are top of mind for a lot of people if you're on campus or whatever. But I can't help but think, Rudyard, that one of the reasons there's so much agitation around those issues is precisely because of the zero-sum dynamics that comes with high unemployment and high costs. Like, solving these basic economic problems won't in and of themselves fully address these other issues that people are increasingly focused on, like immigration and so on. But one can't help but think they go a long way. Immigration was less of an issue when people felt like the economy was growing faster, their incomes were growing faster. It's precisely at the moment where the economy slows down and wages slow down and people start to feel their own sense of insecurity and precarity that their minds turn to all of these other issues that are heating up in our society.
Yeah. And here I say, I go back, I hope in the budget we see like some bigger structural reforms, like nods towards competition reform, regulatory reform, taxation reform, because if you want to deal with young people's increasing sense of economic rootlessness, if not hopelessness, surely we have to deal with these macro factors. And it's great to have lists of major projects, and it's great to have, approved 5 projects that basically were already at or close to the approval stage. But I'm not so sure what a copper mine up in, wherever is going to do for young people's, unemployment rates. And again, as you say, all the downstream effects from that economic precarity and how they start reacting to issues understandably around immigration and why wages are being suppressed through things like the Foreign Temporary Workers Program, the extent to which they potentially become more susceptible to the types of angry messages that express their anger and frustration. So, Sean, I don't know. I'm not hearing a lot. We were up in Ottawa this week. There's still a big, shroud of mystery around what actually will be in this budget. But as you've said before, it's going to become the moment where the Mark Carney government has to come clean with Canadians. Like, is this a budget that is truly transformative, that, gores some of Canada's kind of sacred cows? If it doesn't, Sean, and this is simply a chicken in every pot and some broad strokes, some kind of nods to innovation and clusters and whatever the usual kind of technocratic language of Ottawa, I think we have to be assuming that this is a prime minister who's looking for an election kind of sooner, not later, and isn't really willing to take on What we know are the heavy lifts, the politically painful, potentially, decisions related to that trifecta of taxation, competition, and regulation that would form the basis, I think, of any economic recovery that people could reasonably expect. Major projects on their own are just not going to do this.
Yeah, here. I completely agree with that. I'd push even a bit further that in the absence of nods to those types of more structural reforms, we'll be left, I think, with the necessary conclusion that the government's economic philosophy doesn't really depart from its predecessor, from the Trudeau government. Like, I think one way to understand the Trudeau government's economic philosophy was that the previous government had spent too much time focused on economic growth and not enough on equity or equality and the use of redistribution to try to make sure that there was less inequality in our society. So we saw a significant increase, for instance, Rudyard, in cash transfer payments going from the federal government to people, so much so that in the inequality data from StatsCan this week, the bottom 20% of Canadian households, all of the income growth that they've had in recent years are from government transfers. And so we've had an economy that essentially relied on cash transfers from government and unsustainable increases in immigration to drive the mirage of economic growth. What we really need, as you say, are the types of structural changes such that we can shift the government from a demand side economic agenda of the Trudeau government to a supply side one that lets the private sector drive investment and job growth and income growth and so on. And if we don't see those things, it implies that we're essentially doubling down on the Trudeau agenda, which has resulted in a high unemployment, rising inequality, all the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I just go back. It's just one data point of many, but the OAS, the Old Age Security Clawback, does not begin until $93,000. So a married couple receiving OAS, no clawback, with a household income of almost $200,000. I mean, this compares to younger Canadians, again, facing 15% unemployment rates. Generative AI eliminating a lot of entry jobs. When they do get into the labor force, they're often competing with foreign temporary workers who are suppressing wages in their region or city. And even if they're more trained and more educated, they're into jobs that are a long, long way from a combined household income of $200,000. Now, I'm not expecting Mark Carney or any politician, frankly, to take on OAS and whatever it is, Sean. I think like the quarter of the federal budget now that goes to some form of supports for seniors. I mean, we're talking, I believe, tens, if not well north of $100 billion or more, that is exclusively dedicated to seniors. Seniors are very well looked after in Canada because they are a high incident group of voters, and politicians, just remember Brian Mulroney and those marches on Parliament Hill, tangle with them at their peril. So if you were to look for let's wrap up this section on this and try to project forward. If you were to look for something bold in the budget, something that indicated, okay, this prime minister is not, prepping for a spring election. This prime minister is willing to take on something tough, to gore one of those big bloated cows out there on the herd, stomping around from one end of Canada to the other, our sacred cows. Which one would it be?
Well, let me go a bit off the agenda because yes, of course, we should see foreign ownership liberalization in different parts of the economy, but the thing that I would be championing if I was around the table, Rudyard, is something really radical on corporate tax rates. We had Howard Lutnick talking this week about how the goal of U.S. policy is essentially to pull auto production from Canada to the United States, and I think that vision applies to other parts of the economy. And for Canada to offset or overcome those forces that are tilting capital decisions in the direction of the United States, I think we need to do something radical, not reducing the corporate tax rate by a couple percentage points, like getting rid of corporate taxes altogether, or something quite radical like that, to say whatever other governments are doing to try to encourage businesses and investors to move their capital here, we are going to make Canada the most attractive G7 or advanced economy in the world to invest and earn profit. I think that would, in my mind, signal that the government understands the kind of magnitude of the challenge facing Canada's economy in and of itself in an era of economic stagnation, but in particular in a world where the U.S. has its eye on all of our businesses and all of our investors. We need to do something radical to make Canada a place where people want to invest.
I love it. I bet the chat on the YouTube channel is going to weigh in on that suggestion, Sean. Mine would be to go in a slightly different direction around the other side of the ledger, so to speak, which is the extent to which houses and households are being sheltered from capital gains on their primary residence. When the capital gains exemption on your primary residence was established in the 1970s, it was never designed to shelter millions upon millions of dollars of potentially capital-free gains, which we're now seeing due to the inflation of housing prices across Canada. It is creating, hereditary wealth. That's not the kind of Canada we want to be living in. We don't want, a kind of Downton Abbey of upstairs and downstairs. And it goes back to younger people, right? It goes back to the extent to which a younger generation who can't get into the housing market, who hasn't had this amazing run up in property values and the capital gains protection of that run up, I think it would also it would have an impact on the market. I think it would lower prices. It would hopefully push more capital in Canada outside of this one sector, housing,
yes,
particularly residential housing, into other more productive uses of our capital. One of the problems we have in Canada is that we have become addicted, a bit like the Chinese, not to the same extent, but getting there, in residential housing and real estate more generally, as like an economic driver. It influences our immigration policy. It influences tax policy, and that's all fine, and it has created a lot of wealth in Canada. But it's come at a cost. Real estate is not a particularly productive sector of the economy. In fact, your accountant will tell you, despite raising house prices over the last decade plus, owning a home is a liability. It's not an asset. Your roof gets a leak. Your furnace blows out. You pay property taxes every year. But we've become socialized into this idea that real estate is the sine qua non of wealth creation and wealth appreciation in Canada. I think if you gored that cow, as painful as it might be, you would see big upside benefits for the larger economy, for intergenerational fairness, for housing prices themselves. So that's my big idea. Ain't gonna happen, just like corporate taxes getting taken to zero ain't gonna happen. But maybe one could pay for the other, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I suspect a lot of people who are listening are concerned about the fair treatment of those who own homes and have accounted for the proceeds of the sale for their retirement or whatever, and those are all issues that
Sean, the stock
be
market goes up and the stock market goes down. So your RRSP, what I don't know. I just that idea that this is inevitable. In fact, housing prices may well go down. We may be in a secular decline in housing prices. We don't know.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing. All I'm saying is that I think there are also policy design options, Rudyard, that would enable you to, grandfather it in, maybe for some people, maybe not get rid of it altogether, set a threshold like they have in the United States. The point is that there are ways to try to address those concerns, while recognizing, as you say, that amongst the things that the capital gains exception has done is to do what policies do. They've had an incentive effect that has pulled capital out of the broader economy into housing, and I think that's a part of the story of economic stagnation that we've been living in for for what now increasingly is 2 decades.
Yeah. Just as a quick aside, keep an eye on OSFI. Rutledge, I think I've got that right, the head of OSFI,
Yes.
a couple of weeks ago gave an important speech about requiring banks to do more corporate lending, in a sense saying it's no longer acceptable to do the majority of your lending on residential real estate. You got to change that allocation. We'll see where that goes in terms of policy. Maybe there'll be some direction in the federal budget. Let's say goodbye, Sean, to our complimentary listeners and viewers, and join our Hub Fellows and Hub Heroes on the other side of this short break to talk pipelines. We were out west recently. We've had news this week of Carney's visit to Washington and the Keystone XL maybe back on the table. And we've got some comments by our Natural Resources Minister about Danielle Smith's proposal to get a pipeline to the West Coast. Let's unpack it all for our Hub subscribers right after this short break. This video has been brought to you by Airbnb. A big thank you to Airbnb for sponsoring the Hub's YouTube channel this month. It's great to be the beneficiaries of their support. Here at the Hub, we talk a lot about the housing crisis ongoing in the country. As we know, there are people out there that think that short-term rentals are to blame for taking supply off the market. But here at the Hub, we can feel that doesn't make sense. Consider for a moment that the median number of nights an Airbnb is hosting someone in Canada as a guest is 55. These, frankly, aren't full-time rental properties. They are Canadians trying to get by like the rest of us by finding some additional income through renting out a property they own. Government data supports this. Statistics Canada recently reported the amount of Airbnbs that could actually be converted into long-term homes accounts for only 0.6% of Canada's housing stock. Canada needs solutions to tackle the whole housing market, not just 0.6% of it. We agree. Learn more at airbnb.ca/closer look.